Hey, what's going on, guys? From Gaming here, back in another video. Today's episode, we're gonna dive a little bit further into Shadow Priest. So we made a guide earlier, and it was more of a basic sort of beginner's guide around Shadow Priest. Kind of focused more on like the single button assistant. I want to talk in this specific video, not just basic abilities necessarily, but cooldown alignment. So the spells specifically that I'm going to talk about are going to be my shift 1 through 4 here. We have our Halo, Power Infusion, our Shadow Fiend, and Void Eruption. So Shadow Priest cooldowns are going to synergize really well with Haste. And the reason with Haste is because we'll be able to generate more Insanity. The more Haste, the more Insanity, the more damage as you do. So Haste actually increases the swing speed of our Shadow Fiend. So if we summon our Shadow Fiend here and just let it attack, the more Haste that we have, the faster that it attacks, the more Insanity that we generate from his autos, right? That's very important because all of that Insanity, right, is directly tied to the amount of damage that we deal. Now, even more importantly is if we do cast our Void Eruption here, more Haste is going to decrease the cooldown of our Void Bolt, which is also a huge Insanity generator, right? We get 10 Insanity every time we cast that Void Bolt. So the more Insanity that we can generate, right, the more Devouring Plagues that we can get out. And then not only that, but the more that we can extend our Void form itself. Because if we look at the tooltip here, Void Eruption, we see at the very, very bottom, casting Devouring Plague increases the duration of Void form by 2.5 seconds. So the more Insanity, the more Devouring Plagues, the longer that we can keep our Void form active. So that's kind of the TLDR. Kind of what we're going after here is we're trying to get as much haste as we possibly can into that Void form window. So let's quickly talk about Power Infusion. So we have, this Power Infusion spell that we can cast on an ally, and it's not always going to necessarily be cast on the same person. There is a weak aura out there that will kind of tell you who to cast it on based on if they've sent like major cooldowns or not. That weak aura is going to be right here. It's called Dibs on Power Infusion, and it will just pop up and say, hey, this specific person over here has casted cooldowns. You might consider putting PI on them. Now, PI, right, is going to give us a ton of haste, which is really good with our kit and how Void Form works, because, again, all that haste is more Insanity. So the idea is and this is kind of the case for most DPS specializations, you're trying to funnel, or you're trying to pop all your cooldowns together in like one big batch almost. So Power Infusion, right, is going to be one of the spells. Just like your other cooldowns, you're going to get the maximum number of usages out of it throughout the course of the dungeon. And we want to pair this with our Void Eruption. So again, our Void Eruption is right here, and this is going to trigger our Void form. And when we're in this enhanced form, this is when we want to send all of those crazy Insanity generators, right? So Shadow Fiend, right, that's going to be a very high Insanity generator. We have our Power Infusion, is going to give us all that haste. And then we also have our Void Torrent. So we're not really talking about this, but when you are within that Void form, you want to send your Void Torrent, because if you look at the bottom right here, it generates 24 Insanity over its duration. And you can see it's a pretty quick cast time as well. So it has a good ROI, if you will, on how much time you're spending into the spell and how much Insanity that you're getting from it. So when you're within that Void form, typically your main 2 priority, I guess you have 3 priorities really. It's going to be your Void Bolt, your Devouring Plague, and your Void Torrent. So let's take a quick look at what our opener looks like. So before we actually go into our first Void Eruption, we want to actually pull some Insanity so that right when we get into it, we can hit with a pretty, decently early Devouring Plague. Because there's no reason to waste a couple, like 2 to 3 seconds of our initial Void form building Insanity when we just build it beforehand. So that's going to kind of factor into our opener. So our opener is actually going to be a Shadow Crash that we start out with, into a Shadow Fiend, into 2 Mind Blast, and then into a Halo. That's going to be kind of your general opener. That's going to build some Insanity for us, and then we'll go into the Void Eruption. So kind of breaking this down into pieces, right? Your normal opener is going to be a Shadow Crash, into your Shadow Fiend, into 2 Mind Blasts, 1, 2, into a Halo, and then into your Void Eruption here. And now that we're in this Void form sort of phase, that's when you're going to send your Power Infusion, that's when you're going to send your Tempered Potion, any sort of unused trinkets. This is where you're going to use all that. Now, you can see that we did get a proc of our Mind Flay Insanity, and it might be somewhat tempting to use that right off the bat, but that's actually the lowest priority in your opener. So all these other spells, right, our Void Bolt, our Devouring Plague, Mind Blast, they all take more priority than that Mind Flay Insanity proc. So that's one of the things you can kind of get baited by. Just kind of be careful with that. Now, once you get that Power Infusion, you may or may not have enough Insanity to cast a Devouring Plague. So, let's just say we're in our Void form and you're a little bit short of a Devouring Plague. So from here, you would go into a Shadow Word Death or a Mind Flay. And then once we can actually get that first Devouring Plague off, then that's where we're going to kind of go into the gameplay loop of Void Bolts, Devouring Plague, Void Torrent. And really, the overall goal is just to get as many Devouring Plagues out as we possibly can during that Void form window. So we'll look at the extended rotation here, or the extended opener here in just a second once I get this cooldown ready to go. Okay, so we'll do the normal opener like we just did, but now we're going to extend this out a little bit into Void Bolt, Devouring Plague, and a Void Torrent. Okay, so let's look at the full opener now. So we'll go into a Shadow Crash, into a Shadow Fiend, into 2 Mind Blasts, into a Halo, our Void Eruption, directly into a Void Bolt, into a Devouring Plague, into a Void Torrent, into another Void Bolt, into another Devouring Plague, and now this is where we can start to use our procs. So we can use our Mind Blast proc, well, it went away, and then we can also use our Mind Flay Insanity as well. And then, of course, we're just kind of going back and forth between our procs and our Devouring Plague and our Void Bolt at that stage. So again, procs are very important, but your procs don't really come into play until after you get your main things out. Like you get your Void Eruption out, you get that first Devouring Plague out, you get your Void Torrent out, then you can start to kind of worry about procs. Now, I do quickly want to talk about our Surge of Insanity procs, right? Like how we get them. So every 2 cast of our Devouring Plague, our next Mind Flay is going to turn into this Mind Flay Insanity. So it's very important that we're using this proc. It's very important that we're using our Mind Devour procs. It's very important that we're using our Shadowy Insight procs as well, because we don't want them to just sit and cap. If they cap, that means you could have potentially procced it again, but you didn't get the chance to because it capped on procs, if that makes sense. So after your general opener, procs then kind of become the new priority that you're focused on. But yeah, overall, I just kind of wanted to take a quick look at some of these cooldowns here and how they kind of factored into our opener. So this is just a little bit deeper dive than our last Shadow Priest guide, which kind of focused more on the 1-button rotation and just the baseline of what Shadow Priest is. So hopefully this kind of cleared up our opener a little bit, and hopefully this helps somebody. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. See you guys in the next one.